All right, so good morning, everyone. Welcome. What we're going to talk about for the next 12 minutes or so is going to be what you should expect around the MEF-SDWAN Certified Professional, or otherwise known as SDCP certification exam. All right, and so before we start, I should let you know that I borrowed some of the slides from our Sunset SDCP certification course. Makes it a little bit easier for me to talk. So you're going to see this theme. But one of the things you should know beforehand, before you even start to think about the sitting down and taking the exam, is going to be some of the prerequisites. So as you might expect, to be an SD-WAN certified professional, you're going to need to have a basic understanding of LAN and WAN networking. There is a lot of IPv4 addressing that goes on inside, of course, the SD-WAN planning, but also in the exam itself. So you should understand how to do the addressing, how to look at subnet masks, how to figure out which networks addresses belong to. There is some IPv6 in there as well, but you're not going to be tested on it so much. But if you understand it, that would be a good thing to have as well. You should understand network protocols. One of the simplest one is going to be Ethernet, but you should also understand some of the routing protocols, RIP, OSPF, those kinds of things, because of course the SD-WAN is going to rely on routing protocols to carry information across the SD-WAN from one site to another. And then also, if we are going to set this up, we want to make sure that we understand security requirements and how to implement some of that security across the SD-WAN. All right, so here's the exam. And what we have found based on our experience is these sections, as far as their percentages as being in the exam, pretty accurate. So 25% of the exam, they're going to ask you how to plan and design and assess a customer's current network and how that would be implemented as SD-WAN. 45% of the exam is about implementation. And I'm going to go into each of these little sub areas here in a couple minutes. There's something called lifecycle orchestration that is worth about 15% of the exam questions. And then they're also going to ask you directly about the SD-WAN components and features that you might run across when you're looking at how to implement this kind of thing. All right. So for the assessing, planning, and designing, there are a lot of questions where they're going to give you the customer's current situation, what is it that they're trying to accomplish, and then what would you recommend to be the answer for them when it comes to an SD-WAN. So we're going to talk about the number of links. We're going to talk about the bandwidth of the links. We're going to talk about how to control what traffic goes across each link to get to the other sides, based on the customer's current situation and maybe what they want to do in the future. All right. Implementation, the biggie. We're going to talk about something called application flows. An application flow is how we identify different types of traffic. And of course, once we identify the different types of traffic, we're going to know how to treat it differently. So if you're familiar with QoS, think about it that way. So we're going to identify traffic, and we're going to give traffic certain priority over other traffic. And that's going to be based on application flows. Now, the way that we do that prioritization is with this next section here, policies. And so the policy is saying, okay, for this type of traffic, we're going to send it across this link. We're going to allow this much bandwidth, and we're going to let it do this. Both application flows and policies come straight out of the MEF-70 standard. And so you're going to need to be very familiar with that standard as well. And I'm going to show you some examples of that here in a minute. We talk about UCSs, or underlay connectivity services. What is it that this SD-WAN is running across? Is it going to be strictly Ethernet? Is it going to be some other type of access network? Once we get a connection into the service provider, what kind of services are they providing for us to provide this underlay connectivity service. As I said before, we're going to talk about migration strategies. So the customer already has MPLS, they already have maybe a public internet connection. How are we going to migrate from that to what we need them to have for the SD-WAN? As I said, IP subnetting and addressing for IPv4 and also familiarity with IPv6 would be good, and security requirements. So that's the big chunk of the exam. Lifecycle orchestration. We're going to talk about how to monitor the exam, how to monitor the SD-WAN, how to detect issues that are going to be coming up, how we're going to diagnose that issue, and how we're going to resolve it. All right. We're going to talk about the fact that there's different types of metrics for measuring an SD-WAN as there might be for an IP WAN. So now, instead of looking at just links being up or down, we're going to look at the application performance. And so we're going to have different metrics for that. And then, as I said, we're going to troubleshoot performance issues. All right. Components and features, we're back to that MEF-70 standard. And that defines a bunch of fundamentals, a bunch of characteristics that you're going to need to be familiar with as far as what components are part of an SD-WAN and how they operate. All right. So I only got 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to show you all some of the stuff that we talk about when we're looking at the exam, and also in our course for that matter. So I talked about application flows. We identified different types of traffic so that we can prioritize one type of traffic over another, maybe send it over a different path. We talk about policies, and you can see here there's different types of policies that we're going to apply to traffic. So does it need to be encrypted? Can it go across a public link? Does it need to stay on a private link? Can we send it directly out to the internet? Can we use a backup link as opposed to just a regular link to send traffic across? Bandwidth, that kind of stuff is going to be part of our policies. All right. As I said, we have all kinds of characteristics and features that we're looking at with SD-WAN. The underlay connectivity services, the UCS, we determine these different types of connections across the SD-WAN. Are they public? In other words, do they go off to the internet? Or are they private, like a dedicated MPLS or E1 or whatever type of connection you might have? The connection, is it flat rate or is it usage based? If it's flat rate, then great. We pay one monthly amount for it. We don't care how much traffic goes across, but if it's usage based, maybe we need to send priority traffic only across that link. Is it a backup UCS? Or is it a primary? And of course, we talked about the fact that our different types of connections, they have certain bandwidth limitations, they have performance characteristics, and we're going to look at all of this when we're looking at SD-WAN, and of course, you're going to be asked about all this in the exam. All right, so real quickly, SD-WAN components. I just wanted to go through these slides very quickly for you. So we have the thing called the UCS, the underlay connectivity services. You can see here, it could be all kinds of different services, IP services, VPNs, internet access, optical services, but that provides the underlay that everything is going to go across from one site to another across the SD-WAN. In addition to that, on top of the UCS, we run these things called tunnel virtual connections, TVCs. And the TVC represents a point-to-point link from one site to another across the UCSs. In addition to that, we have the SD-WAN UNI, the user to network interface for the SD-WAN services. Every site has one of those, right? And so this is where we're going to start to apply some of those attributes, some of those characteristics that we can provide for the customer at each site. After that, we talked about the SD-WAN edge. And the SD-WAN edge, you can see this is where we're making our decisions. When traffic needs to go from site B to site A, well, we need to send it across this TVC, and so on. And As I say here, the SD-WAN edge, we also do encryption. That's where we're encrypting the packets before we send them across the SD-WAN. All right. The SD-WAN virtual connection, SWVC, represents the SD-WAN as a whole. And again, it has its own service attributes. And then I guess I didn't get the slide in here, but we also have our SWVC endpoints. Each connection into the SWVC is an endpoint. These are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about in any kind of SDCP course that you also need to be very familiar with when you're doing the exam. All right. Some other components, I call these managed service components as opposed to just MEF components. So web portals where we get in to configure our services. The orchestrator controls all the functionality across the SD-WAN. The SD-WAN controller manages the components, the SD-WAN edges. The SD-WAN edge, as I mentioned, is where we terminate the tunnels back and forth between each site. And then SD-WAN gateway is where we're going to connect our SD-WAN out to something that is not the SD-WAN world. So here's my gateway in this picture. Here's my SD-WAN over here, but I want to connect that into a regular MPLS network. We're going to use gateways for that. All right. So again, the exam, I would say if you need to look at one particular document, although there's several that we're going to go through if you come to our course, would be that MEF-70 document. And that's going to be the standards document. It's called Service Attributes and Services. And that's going to tell us what we need to know when we're setting up an SD-WAN according to MEF. All right. And service attributes, I'm not going to go through them because I'm out of time. But we talk about each of these. You're going to need to understand each of these, what they do, and the function that they provide when we're doing an SD-WAN service. So that's what I got for this 15-minute session.